0.0347 hours. The frigid waters off Greenland's eastern coast were torn apart by the sudden arrival of a French naval task force that had no business being there. The roar of Rafale marine jet engines echoed across the ice fields as the Charles de Gaulle Carrier Strike Group shifted to its highest state of combat readiness directly across established US Navy patrol zones. At 73 degrees north latitude, in international waters that Washington considered an American lake since 1945, France had just drawn a line in the Arctic ice. This wasn't a training exercise. This was a calculated provocation that would force the Pentagon to make a choice it had avoided for 8 decades. Confront a NATO ally with lethal force, or surrender dominance in the world's most strategically critical waterway. One wrong move, and the 73-year NATO alliance, the bedrock of Western military power, could shatter in a single engagement. The Denmark Strait gap that French warships now controlled wasn't just another patch of ocean. This was the only deep water channel between Greenland and Iceland that Russian submarines must transit to reach the Atlantic shipping lanes. Control this choke point, and you control the northern approach to Europe and North America. $14 trillion in annual transatlantic trade flows through zones monitored from these waters. But France's deployment carried a message that went far beyond naval positioning. Paris was declaring that America's century-long presumption of Arctic supremacy was over. President Macron's government had spent 18 months negotiating exclusive resource extraction rights with Greenland's increasingly independent government rights to rare earth deposits worth an estimated $1.7 trillion. The Americans, distracted by Pacific tensions, had ignored the quiet diplomatic revolution happening in Nuuk. Now, French frigates equipped with the latest Scalp naval cruise missiles sat astride the most sensitive submarine detection arrays in the Northern Hemisphere. Arrays that the US Navy considered untouchable sovereign infrastructure. The task force centered on the R-91 Charles de Gaulle, France's only nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, and the sole non-American nuclear carrier in operational service. At 42,000 tons displacement and armed with a strike package of 24 Rafale M fighters and 3 E-2C Hawkeye early warning aircraft, she represented the projection of independent European power into a domain the US had monopolized since the Cold War. But the real threat sailed beneath the surface. Accompanying the carrier was the attack submarine Suffren, the lead vessel of France's new Barracuda-class SSNs, nicknamed Les Fantômes Noirs, the Black Phantoms, for their terrifying stealth profile. At 5,300 tons submerged displacement, Suffren carried pump jet propulsion that made her acoustically invisible below 8 knots. Her AN/BYG-2 equivalent combat system could track 64 simultaneous targets, while her conformal sonar arrays detected threats at ranges the French Navy refused to declassify. Most critically, she carried 18 F-21 heavyweight torpedoes and 12 SCALP naval cruise missiles, with 1,000-kilometer range, enough firepower to obliterate shore installations across Greenland or engage American surface. Combatants from beyond their detection envelope. But the submarine wasn't the masterstroke. That honor belonged to the deployment of 3 Frem-class frigates, Normandy, Provence, and Languedoc, each equipped with the Heracles multifunction radar system capable of tracking ballistic missile trajectories while simultaneously prosecuting submarine contacts. These weren't defensive escorts. They were area denial platforms designed to create a 200 nautical mile exclusion bubble that even Arleigh Burke destroyers would struggle to penetrate without triggering a shooting war. The French battle plan was elegant. Establish persistent presence in the Denmark Strait gap, demonstrate credible capability to interdict Russian submarine traffic independently of NATO command, and force Washington to acknowledge Paris as an equal partner in Arctic security or publicly retreat from a confrontation with an ally. Admiral Laurent Isnard, commanding from the Charles de Gaulle, had explicit orders from the Élysée Palace: do not fire first, do not retreat. Make them understand that French sovereignty in waters adjacent to our economic interests is non-negotiable. What the Admiral didn't know, what none of the French commanders knew, was that they had sailed into the most comprehensively monitored kill box in naval history. And the Pentagon had been watching their approach for 11 days. But what was really happening beneath the surface, and what the French sonar operators had failed to detect, was a silent counter-deployment that had begun the moment Suffren cleared the Brest naval base 14 days earlier. 400 meters below the Arctic thermocline, the USS Montana SSN 794, a Virginia-class Block III attack submarine, had been shadowing the French task force since it entered the Greenland Sea. Montana's large aperture bow sonar array, an acoustic sensor aperture 3 times larger than previous generation submarines, had maintained passive track on Suffren's pump jet signature from a range of 47 nautical miles. The French submarine, confident in her stealth, had no idea she'd been acoustically tagged like a whale with a radio collar since departing French territorial waters. Orbiting 340 miles above the Denmark Strait, 3 National Reconnaissance Office satellites designated Intruder 7, Intruder 9, and Intruder 1-2 had been repositioned from their standard geosynchronous orbits to provide persistent infrared and synthetic aperture radar coverage of the French task force. Every heat signature, every radar emission, every helicopter launch from the Charles de Gaulle was being catalogued in real time and fed through classified data link architecture to US Northern Command in Colorado Springs. The French believed they were operating in a surveillance gap between American coverage zones. In reality, they were performing under the most intense orbital scrutiny the National Security Agency had devoted to a NATO ally since the Suez Crisis of 1956. And then there was the weapon the French had no doctrine to counter: the undersea sensor grid. The sound surveillance system SOSUS was officially decommissioned in the 1990s, its Cold War-era hydrophone arrays supposedly mothballed as obsolete relics. That was the public story. The classified truth was the Integrated Undersea Surveillance System, IUSS, a modernized network of fiber optic acoustic sensors embedded in the Arctic seafloor that could detect submarine transits with such precision that analysts could identify individual propeller blade counts. The Denmark Strait gap was wired with 67 sensor nodes, each capable of triangulating contact positions to within 200 meters. Suffren had been tracked by autonomous algorithms since she crossed the Iceland-Faroe Gap her every course change, depth excursion, and speed adjustment, recorded and analyzed by artificial intelligence systems at the Naval Ocean Processing Facility in Dam Neck, Virginia. The French had made a fatal miscalculation. They had assumed that American dominance in the Arctic was based on superior individual platforms, better submarines, more advanced destroyers, newer aircraft. They were about to learn why the US Navy's real advantage had nothing to do with hull numbers and everything to do with system architecture. The Americans didn't just have better ships. They had built an integrated multi-domain sensor-to-shooter network that turned the entire Arctic Ocean into a weapons engagement zone where stealth was impossible and surprise was a myth. Admiral Isnard thought he was commanding a cutting-edge task force demonstrating European naval power. In reality, he was captaining a target set that the Pentagon had been wargaming for 9 days. At 041, 5 hours 32 minutes after the French task force reached its declared patrol station, the USS Montana received a classified flash traffic message with the brevity code Silent Hammer. The counter-operation was authorized. It was time to send Paris a message they would never forget. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what the United States had positioned in response, not just platforms, but an integrated kill web that represented 30 years of revolution in maritime warfare. USS Montana SSN 794 wasn't just shadowing Suffren, she was the quarterback of a multi-domain prosecution network that linked satellite reconnaissance, airborne sub-hunters, surface combatants, and AI-driven acoustic analysis into a single fused battle space picture. Her Virginia payload tubes, two massive 8 7-inch diameter launch tubes installed behind the sail, carried 40 Tomahawk Block V cruise missiles, enough to obliterate every French surface combatant simultaneously from a range of 1,000 nautical miles. But the Tomahawks were the blunt instrument. The surgical tools were far more sophisticated. Forward deployed from Montana's position were 8 Mark 54 lightweight torpedoes, modern acoustic homing weapons equipped with COTS, commercial off-the-shelf processing power that gave them near-autonomous target discrimination. Unlike the dumb fish of the Cold War, the Mk-54 could distinguish between decoys, marine life, and genuine submarine contacts through advanced algorithmic analysis of acoustic returns. More critically, they could network sharing sensor data through encrypted acoustic modems to execute coordinated multi-axis attacks that collapsed an enemy submarine's evasion geometry. Suffren's countermeasures were designed to defeat single-bearing torpedo attacks. They had no answer to a 4-weapon simultaneous prosecution from cardinal points. But Montana's deadliest capability wasn't kinetic, it was electronic. Her TB-34 Fat Line Towed Array sonar, streaming 1,800 feet behind the submarine on a neutrally buoyant cable, was performing continuous active monitoring using low-frequency acoustic energy to paint Suffren's exact position without betraying Montana's location. The physics were counterintuitive but devastating. By transmitting at frequencies below 1,000 Hz and using the Arctic convergence zone to reflect sound energy downward, Montana could illuminate the French submarine while remaining acoustically invisible herself. To Suffren's passive sonar operators, it sounded like ambient ocean noise. To the Americans, it was a targeting spotlight that updated every 12 seconds. On the surface, the Americans had deployed assets that the French had detected but critically underestimated. The Arleigh-Burke-class destroyer USS Paul Ignatius DDG 117 had taken station 40 nautical miles northeast of the French task force, officially to monitor the situation. Her AN SPY-6 V1 air and missile defense radar, the most powerful shipboard radar ever deployed, was doing far more than monitoring. With 30 times the sensitivity of the previous Spy-1 system, the Spy-6 was tracking not just the French aircraft and surface contacts, but performing ionospheric bounce detection using over-the-horizon radar modes to detect the electromagnetic emissions from Suffren's periscope mast and communications buoy deployments at ranges exceeding 250 miles. Every time Suffren came shallow to copy radio traffic or transmit position reports, her emissions were geolocated to within 400 meters by the Paul Ignatius's electronic warfare suite. The French submarine, operating under strict emissions control to maintain stealth, had no idea that her essential communications were marking her position like a strobe light in a dark room. The integration was the coup de grace, through the Cooperative Engagement Capability Network, to a tactical data link architecture that fused sensor inputs from satellites, submarines, aircraft, and surface ships. The Americans had achieved what the French couldn't counter: perfect situational awareness. Every platform in the battle space could see what every other platform saw, creating a composite track picture so precise that fire control solutions could be generated and distributed faster than human operators could process the information. The French task force's position, heading, speed, acoustic signature, electromagnetic emissions profile, and even the temperature differential of their hulls relative to ambient seawater were being monitored in real time by 17 different sensor platforms. all feeding data through fiber optic links and satellite relays to a combined operations center where AI-assisted battle management systems recommended engagement sequences with 94% confidence intervals. And then there was the weapon the French had no awareness even existed in the Arctic, the P-8, a Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft. At 042, 8 hours, 2 P-8. As call signs, Hammer 61 and Hammer 62 lifted off from Naval Air Station Keflavik in Iceland. Outwardly, they resembled commercial Boeing 737 airliners. Internally, they were sub-hunting juggernauts equipped with AN/APY-10 multimode radar, magnetic anomaly detectors, capable of sensing the ferrous distortion created by a submarine's hull from 10,000 feet altitude, and rotary launchers loaded with 16 Mk-54 torpedoes each. But their most potent capability was the high-gain directional sonobuoy Array 129 expendable acoustic sensors that could be deployed in geometric patterns to create synthetic aperture listening grids across hundreds of square miles of ocean. As the P-8As approached the Denmark Strait gap, they executed a pre-planned barrier drop, releasing sonobuoys in overlapping circular patterns that created acoustic fences through which Suffren could not transit without detection. Each sonobuoy transmitted encrypted acoustic data via UHF satellite link to the aircraft, which fused the inputs through automated tracking algorithms. Within 7 minutes of the barrier being established, Suffren's precise position latitude 73 degrees, 14N, longitude 22 degrees, 06W, depth 380 meters, speed 6 knots, heading 185 degrees, was confirmed and transmitted via link, 1/6 to every American platform in the battle space. The French submarine was no longer a stealth asset. She was a tracked contact, and her commander had no idea his fundamental tactical advantage in visibility had been stripped away. Meanwhile, at 0435 hours, the final piece of the American counter-deployment revealed itself. From beneath the Arctic ice pack, the USS Seawolf SSN, 2-1, the quietest submarine ever built by any nation, had been lying in wait. Unlike the Virginia-class Montana, Seawolf represented the apex predator generation, faster, deeper diving, quieter, and more heavily armed than any attack submarine in existence. Her 8-6-inch torpedo tubes could salvo fire an entire loadout of Mark 48 ADCAP heavyweight torpedoes in under 90 seconds, enough coordinated firepower to sink the entire French task force before they could transmit a contact report. But Seawolf wasn't there to sink anything. She was there to dominate. Her mission was to achieve acoustic lock on Suffren and maintain it, demonstrating to the French that their most sophisticated platform was utterly transparent to American sensors. Seawolf closed to 8,000 yards from Suffren and executed a maneuver that no other submarine could replicate. She matched the French submarine's course and speed exactly, maintaining position in her baffled zone, the acoustic blind spot directly aft, where Suffren's own propulsion noise masked incoming threats. For 17 minutes, the French submarine sailed through the Denmark Strait, completely unaware that an American attack submarine was following 1,200 feet behind. Close enough to read the weld seams on her hull with high-frequency active sonar, weapons hot, fire control solution locked. The stage was set. The Americans had achieved sensor dominance, acoustic superiority, and electromagnetic overmatch. Now it was time to make Admiral Isnard understand exactly what he'd sailed into. At 0447 hours, USS Montana transmitted a single encrypted acoustic message through her underwater telephone, a short-range communication system audible to any submarine within 5,000 yards. 3 words in English: "We see you." Aboard Suffren, Commander Philippe Devereaux froze at his station. Acoustic communications meant one thing: an American submarine was close, dangerously close, and had been tracking them in silence. Before he could order countermeasures, the sonar operator shouted a contact report that sent ice through the command center. Active sonar, high-frequency sweep, bearing 270. Range, Mon Dieu, 800 meters. Seawolf had gone active. Her BQQ 5E wide aperture array was flooding the water with acoustic energy at 8 kHz of focused, overwhelming ping that illuminated Suffren like a searchlight catching a burglar. The sound energy was so intense that it caused minor structural vibration in the French submarine's hull. Every crew member felt the ping as much as heard it. It was acoustic waterboarding, a demonstration that stealth was meaningless when your adversary could simply turn on the lights. Target lock achieved, Seawolf's weapons officer reported. Solution valid. Tubes 1 through 4 ready. But Seawolf didn't fire. Instead, she transmitted a second acoustic message, this time in French. Sous-marin français, vous êtes suivi depuis Brest. Remontez immédiatement. French submarine, you have been tracked since Brest. Surface immediately. Commander Devereux's options collapsed. If the Americans had tracked them since departure, that meant Suffren's stealth profile was compromised from the start. If they were holding weapons lock at point-blank range, maneuvering was suicide. The only rational move was the one that would humiliate France in front of the entire NATO intelligence apparatus. Complet. Blow all ballast tanks, Devereux ordered, his voice hollow. Emergency surface. Transmit contact report to Charles de Gaulle. We are tactically compromised. Suffren broke the surface of the Denmark Strait at 0451 hours, her dark hull emerging from the grey Arctic swells like a wounded whale. Within 90 seconds, the P-8A Poseidons overflew her position at 500 feet altitude, close enough for the crews to visually confirm the submarine's identification numbers. Hammer 61 transmitted a single message on open guard frequency, the emergency channel monitored by all military aircraft. French submarine surfaced and positively identified. No hostile action. Repeat, no hostile action. US Navy maintains positive control. On the bridge of the Charles de Gaulle, Admiral Isnard received the transmission with the force of a physical blow. His submarine, the stealth platform that was supposed to be the invisible guarantor of his task force's security, had been forced to surface by American anti-submarine forces without a single shot fired. The tactical humiliation was absolute. But the Americans weren't finished. At 0454 hours, Paul Ignatius executed a close-pass maneuver, accelerating to 32 knots and closing to within 2,000 yards of the Charles de Gaulle's port side. Close enough that her towering Spy 6 radar arrays were visible to the naked eye from the French carrier's deck. As she passed, Paul Ignatius transmitted a message on NATO Tactical Frequency Unencrypted, Deliberate Public. French Task Force, this is USS Paul Ignatius. Your submarine has been under continuous surveillance since departing territorial waters. Your surface units have been tracked by satellite and airborne assets throughout your deployment. You are operating in a monitored zone. We recommend you reconsider your patrol parameters. This is not a threat. This is a courtesy notification. The word courtesy landed like a slap. The Americans were making clear that the French deployment, the entire show of force, had been transparent from the beginning. Every tactical decision, every maneuver, every communication had been observed, analyzed and countered before it even occurred. Admiral Isnard had two choices: escalate by ordering his escorts to achieve targeting lock on American ships, which would trigger a crisis that France could not win, or withdraw under the guise of mission completion. At 0502 hours, he transmitted orders to the task force: alter course to 270 degrees. We are repositioning to the Jan Mayen patrol box. It was the retreat, disguised in the bureaucratic language of operational flexibility. But the Americans delivered one final message, and this one came from Moscow. As the French task force began its turn westward, USS Montana detected a new contact entering the Denmark Strait from the northeast. A Russian Akula-class attack submarine, designated K-335 Gepard, transiting at 400 meters depth, toward the Atlantic Gap. The submarine France had deployed to interdict independently had arrived, and the French had missed it entirely. Montana transmitted the contact data to Paul Ignatius, which immediately relayed it via encrypted channel to Admiral Isnad with a pointed annotation. Russian SSN transiting your former station. Contact designated Red 4-1. We are prosecuting. You are clear to exit area. The implication was devastating. While France had been performing its demonstration of independent capability, a real threat had entered the battle space, and the Americans had detected, tracked, and positioned to prosecute it without French assistance. The entire French deployment had been operationally irrelevant to the actual security mission in the Arctic. Gepard, unaware of the American presence, continued her transit directly into the sonobuoy barrier Hammer 61 had laid. Within seconds, her acoustic signature was classified and targeting data was distributed to Montana, Seawolf, and the P-8A. Unlike Suffren, the Russian submarine was given no courtesy warning. The Americans simply held the lock, letting the Russian commander know through the persistent active sonar illumination that he was trapped in an engagement zone he couldn't escape. At 0518 hours, Gepard altered course back to the northeast and accelerated to flank speed, a panicked retreat executed by a submarine commander who realized he'd stumbled into a kill box. The Russians hadn't even attempted to complete their transit. They'd simply fled. The message to Paris was unmistakable. The Americans didn't just dominate the Arctic. They dominated it so thoroughly that even Russia, France's theoretical adversary in the region, couldn't operate without American awareness and consent. France had deployed a task force to challenge American supremacy. The US Navy had responded by demonstrating that supremacy wasn't a claim, it was a physical reality enforced by technology France couldn't match and Russia couldn't evade. By 0600 hours, the Charles de Gaulle strike group was repositioned 90 nautical miles west of the Denmark Strait Gap, officially conducting routine air operations that would never again approach established American patrol zones. The French Ministry of Defense released a terse statement describing the deployment as a successful demonstration of France's Arctic capabilities and commitment to NATO interoperability. The Pentagon said nothing publicly. Privately, the classified after-action report circulated among Five Eyes intelligence partners with a single-line assessment. Adversary capability to conduct independent operations in contested Arctic environment assessed as negligible without US sensor architecture support. What happened in those 90 minutes off Greenland wasn't a battle, it was a revelation. The French had approached the Arctic with a 20th century assumption that naval power was about platforms, better ships, quieter submarines, more advanced aircraft. The Americans revealed a 21st century reality. Naval power is about networks. The submarine isn't the weapon. The system that detects, tracks, classifies, and targets the submarine across multiple domains simultaneously is the weapon. Suffren was a technological marvel, but she was a single node attempting to operate against an integrated mesh that spanned satellites, seafloor sensors, attack submarines, surface combatants, and AI-driven fusion centers. The French brought a knife to a gunfight. The Americans brought a weapons grid that didn't even require them to draw their guns to achieve total dominance. The strategic lesson was absorbed instantly by every NATO ally with Arctic ambitions. Norway quietly requested expanded intelligence sharing agreements with Northcom. The United Kingdom began negotiations to integrate Royal Navy Type 26 frigates into US Navy Link 1-6 architecture. Even Canada, which had positioned itself as a counterweight to American Arctic policy, opened discussions about joint sensor network development. The era of independent European naval operations in strategic waterways was over. Welcome to the age of system supremacy, where tactical advantage belongs not to the best platform, but to the best network. And in the Arctic, that network has exactly one architect, the United States Navy. As for Russia, Gepard's aborted transit confirmed what the Kremlin had feared since the modernization of IUSS began in 2019. The Arctic Bastion strategy, Russia's plan to maintain survivable SSBN bastions under the polar ice, was compromised. If American sensors could detect, classify and target French submarines in real time, then Russian boomers carrying intercontinental ballistic missiles were equally transparent. The naval balance that had preserved strategic stability since the Cold War was broken, and Russia no longer had the technological capacity to restore it. Moscow's response came within 72 hours. An official proposal for bilateral US-Russia discussions on Arctic maritime confidence-building measures, diplomatic language for "please tell us where we're allowed to operate without being humiliated." The French deployment had intended to challenge American dominance. Instead, it validated it, proving to allies and adversaries alike that the Arctic is an American domain not because of treaty rights or historical claims, but because of sensor architecture superiority that turns stealth into theater and surprise into fantasy. One French task force, 90 minutes of humiliation, and the geopolitical map of the Arctic was rewritten, not through battle, but through the quiet dominance of a network the world never saw coming. The question now isn't whether America controls the Arctic. The question is, how long until China realizes the same sensors that dominated Sufren are being positioned in the South China Sea, and what will Beijing do when their submarines start surfacing involuntarily? That's the analysis we're working on next. Should we cover China's response to Arctic lessons learned, or break down the technology behind undersea sensor grids that made this possible? Comment below. Your input determines what we investigate next. If this analysis changed how you think about modern naval power, hit subscribe. Because the revolution in maritime warfare isn't coming, it already happened, and most of the world is still catching up.